The first thing that hits you when you walk into the geriatric ward of an old hospital at 3 in the morning is the silence. It's not a peaceful silence. It's a heavy, weighted silence, thick with the ghosts of unspoken words and the faint, ever-present scent of antiseptic and decay. It's a silence that crawls under your skin and makes a home there, a constant low-level hum of dread. My name is Sarah, and for one terrifying week, I was a night shift nurse at St. Michael's Hospital, a sprawling Gothic monstrosity that had been looming over the town of Havenwood, Massachusetts for the better part of a century. I took the job out of desperation. My savings had dwindled to almost nothing, and my dream of opening a small bakery seemed to be slipping further and further away. The pay at St. Michael's was surprisingly good, especially for the graveyard shift. Now I know why. The geriatric ward, my assigned territory, was located in the oldest part of the hospital, a labyrinth of long, dimly lit corridors and peeling linoleum floors. The fluorescent lights flickered and buzzed, casting long, dancing shadows that played tricks on the mind. During my orientation, a cheerful, overly caffeinated nurse named Brenda had given me a whirlwind tour, her voice a constant chirpy monologue that did little to ease the growing sense of unease in the pit of my stomach. She'd pointed out the nurse's station, the medication room, the linen closet, her words a blur of information that I struggled to retain. But then she'd stopped in front of a heavy oak door at the end of the hall, a door that seemed strangely out of place amongst the sterile white walls of the ward. A small brass plaque on the door read, "Room 413. "We don't use this room," she'd said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "The plumbing shot. And besides," she'd added with a nervous laugh, "it gives me the creeps." I'd glanced at the door, a shiver tracing its way down my spine. There was something about it, a sense of coldness that seemed to emanate from the wood, a feeling of deep, profound sadness. I dismissed it as first-night jitters, the product of an overactive imagination and a lack of sleep. I was wrong. My first few nights were deceptively quiet. I made my rounds, checking on my elderly patients, their frail bodies lost in the stark white of their beds. I administered medication, changed IV bags, and filled out charts, the mundane tasks a welcome distraction from the oppressive silence. I even managed to strike up a friendship with one of the other night nurses, a kind, motherly woman named Eleanor, who had been working at St. Michael's for over 30 years. Eleanor was a wealth of stories, most of them humorous anecdotes about the eccentricities of the patients and the foibles of the hospital administration. But there was a darkness in her eyes, a shadow of something unspoken that I couldn't quite decipher. It was on my third night that things started to get strange. I was at the nurse's station, catching up on some paperwork, when I heard it, a faint childish giggle echoing from the end of the hallway. I froze, my pen hovering over the chart. I was the only one on duty in that wing. All of my patients were asleep. I told myself it was just the old building settling, the pipes groaning, the wind whistling through a crack in a window. But then I heard it again, closer this time, a playful, innocent sound that was chillingly out of place in the sterile, somber environment of the ward. I got up from my chair, my heart hammering against my ribs, and walked slowly down the hallway, the silence pressing in on me from all sides. The giggling seemed to be coming from the direction of room 413. As I approached the door, the air grew colder, the kind of deep, penetrating cold that seeps into your bones and makes your teeth chatter. I reached out a trembling hand and touched the doorknob. It was ice cold. I hesitated for a moment, my mind screaming at me to turn back, to run and never look back. but a strange sense of curiosity, a morbid fascination, compelled me forward. I turned the knob and pushed the door open. The room was dark, the air thick with the smell of dust and disuse. A single iron-framed bed stood in the center of the room, a ghostly silhouette in the faint moonlight that filtered through the grimy window. A small wooden rocking horse sat in the corner, its paint peeling, its once bright colors faded to a dull, ghostly gray. And then I saw her. A little girl, no older than 7 or 8 years old, was sitting on the floor, her back to me. She was wearing a simple white nightgown, her long, dark hair tied back with a blue ribbon. She was humming a simple nursery rhyme tune, a melody that was both sweet and unsettling. My breath caught in my throat. I wanted to scream, to run, but my feet were rooted to the spot. The little girl slowly turned her head, and my blood ran cold. Her eyes were 2 dark, empty sockets, bottomless pits of darkness that seemed to suck the very light from the room. A single tear, black as ink, trickled down her pale cheek. I don't know how long I stood there, paralyzed by fear, my mind struggling to process what I was seeing. The little girl didn't move, didn't make a sound, just stared at me with those terrible, empty eyes. And then, as suddenly as she had appeared, she was gone. The room was empty, the only sound, the frantic thumping of my own heart. I slammed the door shut and ran back to the nurse's station, my mind reeling. I tried to tell myself that I had imagined it, that I was overtired, that the stress of the new job was getting to me. But I knew what I had seen, and I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that I was not alone in that ward. The next night, I confided in Eleanor, my voice a trembling whisper, as I recounted my experience. She listened patiently, her expression unreadable. When she had finished, she let out a long, weary sigh. "You saw the little girl," she said, her voice heavy with a sadness that seemed to seep into the very air around us. Her name was Lily. She was a patient here a long time ago. She died in that room. She told me the story of Lily, a young girl who had been admitted to St. Michael's with a severe case of tuberculosis in the early 1940s. She had been a bright, cheerful child, beloved by the nurses and doctors who cared for her. But as her illness progressed, she had grown weaker, her laughter replaced by a hacking cough, her bright eyes dulled by pain and fever. She had died alone in the middle of the night, her small body finally succumbing to the disease that had ravaged her lungs. Since then, her spirit had been seen wandering the halls of the ward, her ghostly giggles a sad, lonely echo of a life cut short. Eleanor's story, meant to be a comfort, only served to heighten my fear. The knowledge that the ghost had a name, a history, made her all the more real, all the more terrifying. The strange occurrences escalated after that night. I would hear my name whispered from empty rooms, feel the cold touch of an unseen hand on my shoulder. Objects would move on their own, a book falling from a shelf, a pen rolling off a desk. The call light for room 413 would flash, its insistent beeping a summons from a room that was supposed to be empty. I became a nervous wreck, jumping at every shadow, my sleep plagued by nightmares of the little girl with the empty eyes. I was on the verge of quitting, of walking away from the job and never looking back. But something held me back, a strange sense of responsibility, a feeling that I couldn't just abandon the other nurses, that I couldn't leave Eleanor to face the darkness alone. One night, I found Eleanor in the break room, her face pale, her hands trembling as she clutched a steaming cup of coffee. She looked up at me, her eyes wide with a fear that mirrored my own. "He's back," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "He?" I asked, a new wave of dread washing over me. The orderly, she said, her voice dropping to a hushed, terrified whisper. He was a monster. He worked here in the 50s. He hurt the children. He was the one who killed Lily. The story spilled out of her in a torrent of hushed, horrified words. The orderly, a man named Thomas, had been a predator, a wolf in sheep's clothing who had used his position of trust to prey on the most vulnerable of patients. He had taken a special interest in Lily, his kindness a mask for the darkness that lurked beneath. He had been the one on duty the night she died. He had smothered her with a pillow, silencing her cries, her struggles, her life. He had made it look like she had succumbed to her illness, and he had gotten away with it. He had continued to work at St. Michael's for another 10 years, his crimes undiscovered, his evil hidden behind a veneer of professionalism. He had died in the hospital, a heart attack claiming him in the very ward where he had committed his most heinous crime. And now, his malevolent spirit was as much a part of the hospital as the bricks and mortar. Eleanor's words sent a chill down my spine that had nothing to do with the cold of the hospital. The giggling, the whispers, the moving objects, it all made a terrifying kind of sense now. Lily wasn't the only ghost in the ward, and she wasn't the one I should be afraid of. The next night, I felt a palpable shift in the atmosphere of the ward. The air was heavy, charged with a malevolent energy that made the hairs on my arms stand on end. The whispers were no longer the sad, lonely pleas of a lost child, but the guttural growls of something ancient and evil. I was in the medication room drawing up a dose of insulin for one of my patients when the door slammed shut, plunging me into darkness. I fumbled for the light switch, my heart pounding in my chest. The switch was gone. I was trapped. A low, guttural laugh echoed through the small room, a sound that seemed to vibrate through the very floorboards. I could feel his presence, a cold, suffocating weight that pressed in on me from all sides. "Get out of my ward," a voice rasped that was both a whisper and a roar. I screamed, a raw, primal sound that was swallowed by the oppressive darkness. I pounded on the door, my fists bloody and raw, my cries for help echoing in the empty room. And then I heard it. A faint, tinkling melody, a nursery rhyme tune that was both familiar and strangely comforting. Lily. A soft, ethereal light began to emanate from the other side of the door, seeping through the cracks, pushing back the darkness. The malevolent presence in the room recoiled, hissing and spitting like a cornered animal. The door creaked open and I stumbled out into the hallway, my body trembling, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The hallway was bathed in a soft, gentle light, and standing at the end of the hall was the figure of a little girl, her form shimmering and translucent. She wasn't smiling, but there was a sense of peace about her, a tranquility that seemed to radiate from her very being. She raised a small, ghostly hand and pointed towards the door of room 413. And then she was gone. I knew what I had to do. I couldn't let Thomas's evil continue to terrorize this ward, to hold Lily's spirit captive. I walked to the door of room 413, a strange sense of calm settling over me. The fear was still there, a cold, hard knot in the pit of my stomach, but it was overshadowed by a fierce, protective anger. I opened the door and stepped inside. The room was even colder than before, the air thick with the stench of decay. The figure of a man stood in the corner of the room, his form a swirling vortex of hate. The orderly. He hissed, his voice a venomous whisper. "This is my ward. You are not welcome here." "This isn't your ward,"
I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "This is a place of healing, and you are not welcome here." He laughed, a cold, cruel sound that echoed in the small room. "You think you can make me leave? I am a part of this place. I am eternal." "You are nothing," I said, my voice ringing with a newfound authority. "You are a memory, a stain, and it's time you were washed away." I don't know where the words came from, but they felt right. I could feel Lily's presence with me, a small, steady flame in the overwhelming darkness. The orderly lunged at me, his shadowy form coalescing into a grotesque mockery of a human being. But before he could reach me, a blinding white light filled the room, a light that was both beautiful and terrifying. The orderly shrieked, a sound of pure agony, as the light consumed him, his form dissolving into nothingness. The room was filled with a sense of peace, a quiet serenity that I had never felt before. The cold was gone, replaced by a gentle warmth. I could feel Lily's gratitude, a soft, gentle whisper in the back of my mind, "Thank you." And then she was gone. I walked out of room 413 and into the hallway, the first rays of dawn beginning to filter through the windows. The ward was quiet, the oppressive silence replaced by a sense of peace. I knew I couldn't work at St. Michael's anymore. I had seen too much, felt too much. The veil between the worlds had been lifted, and I could never go back to the way things were. I handed in my resignation that morning, the words a jumble of half-truths and excuses. I didn't tell them about Lily or the orderly. They wouldn't have believed me. I walked out of St. Michael's and into the bright sunlight, the weight of the past week lifting from my shoulders. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew that I had to get as far away from Havenwood as possible. Sometimes, late at night, when the house is quiet and the world is asleep, I can still hear the faint, childish giggle, the sad, lonely echo of a little girl lost in the darkness, and I know that a part of me will always be there, in that haunted hospital, a silent witness to the horrors that lurk in the shadows, a keeper of secrets that are better left buried. My bakery is a small, cheerful place, filled with the scent of fresh bread and cinnamon. The sunlight streams through the large front window, and the sound of children's laughter fills the air. It's a happy place, a place of life and light. But sometimes, when I'm alone, late at night, I can still feel the cold touch of an unseen hand on my shoulder, a chilling reminder of the week I spent in the geriatric ward of St. Michael's, a week that taught me that some ghosts never truly leave us. They become a part of our story, a shadow that follows us, a whisper in the silence, and they never, ever let us forget.